I always thought TV was just entertainment, until something happens on camera that you can't unsee. Hey there, Nathan Cole here, and this is what I'm looking at today. From a man carrying a dangerous backpack onto a live TV set, to a woman stepping past a warning sign onto a slick waterfall ledge with nothing to grab onto. It was June 18, 2017, in Columbus, Ohio. The studio sat in a commercial district surrounded by office buildings and parking structures. Inside, everything was already in motion that morning. Lights set, audience seated, production moving on schedule. It was a live daytime talk show built around structured segments and controlled conversations. Nobody in that building had any reason to think the day would end differently than any other, least of all because of one quiet man sitting in the green room with a backpack at his feet. Calder Mays was 38, a records clerk for a regional logistics company. He lived alone in a small apartment about 20 minutes from the studio. His routine was steady, same commute, same schedule, same habits day after day. Nothing in his background suggested risk, no record of confrontations, no pattern of unstable behavior. But the way that day came together stood out. He requested a single day off work and confirmed his appearance on the show ahead of time. Nothing appeared rushed or last minute. He arrived early and went through the check-in process. Bags were passed across a table for inspection, with a handheld scanner used intermittently as guests were processed in batches. His backpack was opened briefly but not fully unpacked. The container inside wasn't identified as anything unusual, and the lighter wasn't flagged. The process was designed to keep people moving, not to examine every item in detail. He sat with the other guests while waiting for his segment. People nearby later described him as calm and reserved. He answered when spoken to, but didn't start conversations, kept his backpack close by his feet, and occasionally glanced toward the stage entrance when names were called. Nothing about his behavior drew attention. The segment he was part of aired midway through the show. He walked out on stage with two other guests and took his seat across from the host. The conversation followed a familiar pattern. Introductions, background questions, then moving into personal perspectives. He spoke clearly and stayed composed. His posture didn't change, his tone didn't shift, and there was nothing in his delivery that suggested anything out of place. Then, without any let-in, he leaned down toward the backpack beside his chair. From the audience, it looked routine. People adjust things on set all the time. No one reacted. He pulled out a small container. Even then, it didn't register right away. People in the front rows later said they assumed it was something harmless or related to the segment. That brief delay gave him time. He opened the container and began, pouring the liquid over his shoulders and chest, moving deliberately. The smell reached the front rows almost immediately, sharp and unmistakable, and that's when people started to shift. A few stood up. Staff at the edge of the stage began moving closer, but there was still hesitation. There was a short pause, just a few seconds, where recognition started to catch up. Then, he reached into his pocket and produced a lighter. The ignition was immediate. Flames spread across his clothing within seconds. The audience didn't react all at once. People in the front rows pulled back first, while others were still trying to process what they were seeing. Staff rushed in from the sides of the set, fire extinguishers arriving seconds later. He collapsed shortly after. By the time the fire was fully put out, the injuries were already severe. He was unresponsive when they reached him. Calder Mays was pronounced dead later that day from severe burn trauma. The incident was ruled an intentional act following an investigation. No detailed motive was publicly confirmed, though his actions leading up to the appearance suggested prior planning. The broadcast was cut mid-segment, prompting an internal review of guest screening procedures, and the footage was never aired again. He walked into a controlled studio with everything planned, and it unraveled in seconds once he made that choice. Up next, in a quiet residential neighborhood miles away, I follow a ride-along where a routine entry turns into something the officers can't walk back once it starts. It was August 9, 2015, in a residential neighborhood in Dayton, Ohio. A police crew had been working in the area that morning, accompanied by a camera team filming ride-alongs for a televised segment. From what I've seen, those crews usually capture routine calls, the kind that don't escalate. Ronan Pike was 42, a self-employed auto detailer working out of a rented garage space on the edge of town. His schedule was irregular, often working late depending on demand. People who knew him described someone independent and not particularly social, but steady when it came to his work. Most of his time was split between the garage and his house. By By the time officers were sent to Ronan's address, it was being treated as a standard follow-up, a noise complaint from a nearby resident, no indication it would require more than a brief check. The camera crew followed closely behind, as they'd been doing all morning, filming routine stops and short interactions. They arrived just after midday. 2 officers approached the front of the house, while the camera crew stayed several feet back, filming from the driveway. The front door was closed, no visible movement inside. One of the officers knocked. There was a short delay. Then, movement behind the door, subtle, partially obscured. The officers held position. The camera kept the shot steady, centered on the entrance. The door opened, partway. Ronan stood just inside, no more than a few feet from the threshold. He didn't step out. The door stayed between them, angled just enough to block part of his body. From where the officers stood, roughly 5 to 6 feet from the entrance, they didn't have a full view of his hands or his right side. The interaction started as a standard exchange. No raised voices, no sudden change in tone, but he didn't adjust his position. He stayed partially behind the door, keeping that same limited angle. One of the officers shifted slightly to improve his line of sight past the doorframe. The other remained centered, continuing the interaction. The camera crew stayed behind them, filming over their shoulders. Then, Ronan moved. His right arm pulled back out of view behind the door. It wasn't a fast motion, but it was deliberate enough to break the rhythm of the interaction. The officer to the side adjusted again, trying to track the movement, but the doorframe continued to block it. That's where situations like this narrow down. The officers aren't seeing the full action, just pieces of it. Out of sequence. Ronan brought his arm forward. For a fraction of a second, the object in his hand was only partially visible. Dark and compact, consistent in shape with a small firearm from that distance and angle. At the same time, his body shifted forward into the doorway, closing the gap slightly. That overlap mattered. There wasn't a pause between recognition and response. The officer reacted at the same moment the object came into view. The officer fired. The sound carried across the block, sharp and contained. The camera captured it from behind, the frame jolting slightly but staying on the doorway. Ronan fell backward into the house, out of sight beyond the threshold. Then the officers moved in. Ronan Pike was pronounced dead at the scene. What he was actually holding turned out to be a cordless power drill, dark, compact, and at that angle, close enough in shape to what the officer perceived in that fraction of a second. The shooting was reviewed as part of a standard use of force investigation and was ruled justified based on the officer's perception of a threat at the time. No charges were filed. The footage was reviewed internally but never aired in full, with only limited details released afterward. It started as a routine approach to a closed door, and it ended within a fraction of a second. It made me think about how not every danger is visible, like a studio demonstration miles away, where the problem isn't what you see, but what you're breathing. It was April 22, 2016, in a studio facility on the outskirts of Chattanooga, Tennessee. The building was used for local productions, talk segments, demonstrations, short-form programming built around controlled setups. Inside, everything was fixed and predictable. Lighting rigs locked in place, marked positions on the floor, equipment arranged ahead of time. It was the kind of space where nothing was supposed to behave unpredictably. Dorothy Rourke was 51. A freelance event coordinator who occasionally assisted with on-camera demonstrations. She wasn't part of the core production team, but she was familiar with structured environments and used to following timing cues. That afternoon, she had been brought in for a short segment involving a controlled demonstration. The setup was simple: show how an inert gas behaves inside a confined space. The setup presented as safe due to the gas being non-toxic, despite its ability to displace oxygen in enclosed areas. It wasn't framed as dangerous. From what I've seen, these segments are usually presented in a way that makes the risk feel theoretical, not immediate. The crew had spent the morning preparing the stage. A clear enclosure had been positioned at the center, large enough for one person to stand inside. It wasn't fully airtight, but the enclosure limited airflow enough that gas could accumulate inside faster than it could disperse. A tank was connected to a regulated release system just outside the frame. Dorothy's role was limited: step inside, remain there briefly while the explanation was given, then step out once the segment wrapped. No complex movement, no technical involvement, just timing. By early afternoon, everything was set. Cameras locked in, lighting adjusted, crew in position. Dorothy stepped into the enclosure and stood where she had been directed, centered within the frame. The demonstration began. Gas was released into the enclosure gradually. It wasn't visible. No color, no haze, nothing that would signal a change from the outside. The air inside looked exactly the same as it had seconds before. I've seen setups like this before, and the problem is always the same. There's nothing to react to until it's already affecting you. The concentration inside the enclosure built faster than expected, reducing the available oxygen within seconds. Dorothy remained in place, following the timing she had been given. From the camera's perspective, nothing had changed. A few seconds in, her posture shifted. It was slight, a small adjustment in stance, like she was correcting her balance. The kind of movement that wouldn't stand out on its own, but it didn't correct itself. She shifted again, this time slower, less controlled. I can tell the crew hesitated for a moment, still following the timing they expected, with no visible indicator that something had gone wrong. There wasn't anything visible that forced them to stop the segment. Then, her knees gave out. She dropped forward inside the enclosure without bracing herself, her hands not catching her the way they normally would. That's when the movement outside changed. Crew members moved in quickly, opening the enclosure and pulling her out onto the stage floor. The gas flow was shut off immediately. Someone moved the tank away while others focused on her position on the ground. She didn't respond when they tried to reposition her. There was no visible injury, nothing external that explained it. That part stands out to me. Everything looked intact from the outside, but something had already gone wrong at a level they couldn't see. Dorothy Rourke died as a result of oxygen displacement inside the enclosure. The concentration of gas had reduced the available oxygen in the space beyond what the body could tolerate, and it happened without any visible warning during the demonstration. The entire demonstration was being recorded for broadcast. The segment was never aired, and the setup was removed afterward, following an internal review. It was designed to stay controlled, and it failed in a way no one in that room could see while it was happening. It takes me to a set miles away where the warning signs are right in front of someone, and they still choose to keep going. If you're still with me on this one, consider subscribing to Fatal Files. I keep these stories grounded and real, and there's more coming like this. It was November 3rd, 2017, at a private filming location in Scottsdale, Arizona. The property had been set up for a reality dating show. Multiple contestants living together, shared spaces, cameras positioned throughout the house and surrounding grounds. Most of the activity was structured around scheduled segments, but outside of those, there were periods where filming coverage was lighter. That kind of setup stands out to me because once people move outside the main areas, oversight isn't as immediate. Tavian Slade was 29, a fitness instructor based out of Nevada. He worked with small groups, running structured programs that relied as much on personality as they did on training. People who knew him described someone competitive and comfortable in social settings, the kind of person who didn't back away from tension. He had been on set for just under a week. By then, the group had already started forming smaller dynamics, and his interactions with another contestant had grown more tense over the previous 2 days. Nothing that broke format, but enough that others had noticed. That evening's schedule left a gap between segments. Some contestants stayed in the main living area, others moved outside or back toward their rooms. Tavian stepped away from the group and moved toward a side section of the property, a narrow concrete walkway along the back of the house. On one side was the exterior wall, on the other, a low retaining wall, separating it from a slightly lower section of the yard. The drop was modest, around 4 to 5 feet, but the ground below was uneven, with exposed stone. The other contestant followed him. At first, the interaction stayed controlled. No raised voices, no sudden movements, but their positioning changed. Distance closing, posture tightening. That shift is usually where things start to move, which makes me think the outcome was already set once they closed that distance. They stopped along the walkway, standing within a few feet of each other. There wasn't much room to move without stepping toward the edge. The first contact was brief, a push, not enough to knock either of them down, but enough to change the tone. Neither stepped back after that. The distance held, and it didn't settle. They moved in again. Hands up, contact again, less controlled. Their movements became tighter, more reactive. In that space, there wasn't enough room to disengage cleanly once they were within reach. Tavian stepped forward again. His back foot landed near the edge of the walkway, where the flat surface met the top of the retaining wall. The change in level wasn't obvious, and his footing shifted slightly as his weight came down near the edge. He lost his balance there. His weight shifted backward, and his upper body followed. He tried to recover, but there wasn't enough space behind him to stabilize. He went over the wall. The drop was short, but the landing surface mattered more than the height. He struck the back of his head against compacted ground with exposed stone. The other contestants stopped at the edge immediately, looking down. Nearby crew members moved in within seconds, responding to the sound and sudden movement from that side of the property. Tavian Slade was unresponsive when they reached him below the wall. He did not regain consciousness. The cause of death was a fatal head injury sustained on impact from the fall, and the incident was determined to be accidental, resulting from a physical altercation in a confined space. The incident was captured on nearby production cameras. The footage was reviewed but not released due to the fatal nature of the incident and privacy concerns. A brief argument in a tight space turned physical, and one misstep over the edge made it irreversible. Meanwhile, miles away on a forest trail, it reminds me of someone who stepped past a warning sign and kept going into terrain that wasn't meant to be crossed. It was May 27, 2018, at a residential property being used for a renovation show in Savannah, Georgia. The production had been working there for several days, moving room by room, filming staged progress alongside actual renovation work. Inside, the structure was mid-project, sections stripped down, ventilation reduced, materials and tools spread across different areas of the house. Garen Loach was 36, a maintenance technician who had spent most of his career working in apartment complexes and small commercial buildings. His experience was practical: repairs, installations, general upkeep. He was used to working with solvents and adhesives, but typically in open or partially ventilated spaces. He had joined the production as one of the participants contributing to the renovation work on site. That afternoon, the focus had shifted to a back room that had been partially sealed off during earlier stages of the project. Plastic sheeting covered the doorway to contain debris, and the windows remained closed. Inside, a chemical adhesive remover was being applied to break down flooring material bonded to the surface. Airflow in the room was limited. A single fan had been positioned near the doorway, pushing air outward into the hallway rather than bringing fresh air in. The chemical had a strong odor that carried beyond the room. That detail stands out because it suggests the concentration inside the space was already higher than it should have been. Garen was working alone inside. He continued applying the remover across the floor, following a steady pattern. Apply, wait, scrape. The longer he stayed inside that space, the more exposure he took on without a break in airflow. After several minutes, his movement changed. It started with small pauses between steps that didn't match his earlier pace. Then he straightened up, staying still for a moment as if trying to steady himself. That kind of change usually doesn't draw attention right away. It's subtle, easy to miss if no one is watching closely. He tried to continue, one step forward, then another, but this time, he hesitated mid-step, like his balance didn't line up with where his body expected it to be. His hand went to the wall, not just for support, but to stay upright. The container in his other hand tilted, then slipped slightly in his grip. For a moment, he just stood there, unfocused. Then his footing gave out. He dropped to one knee, then forward onto his hands. The container fell, spilling more of the remover across the floor. He didn't attempt to stand back up. A crew member passing through the hallway noticed the movement and stepped in. They pulled him out of the room within seconds, moving him into the hallway where the air was clearer. By then, he was unresponsive. Others nearby moved in, clearing the room and stopping the chemical use immediately. The doorway covering was pulled back, and the space was opened, but the air inside had already been affected. Garen Loach died from acute inhalation of concentrated chemical fumes in a confined, poorly ventilated space. The buildup of concentrated vapors in the confined space led to toxic inhalation, impairing him before there was any visible indication of danger. The incident occurred while cameras were actively filming the renovation work. The segment was not used, and work in that area was halted afterward. He kept working in a space that was already turning unsafe. By the time it showed, it was too late to step out of it. The next one makes me think about how quickly confidence takes over, because someone moved beyond a marked stop point onto rock that doesn't hold the way it looks. It was March 8, 2016, in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina. The area is known for its waterfall trails, maintained paths at the lower levels that lead to designated viewing points. But past those areas, the terrain changes quickly. The ground narrows, the rock stays wet, and the difference between stable footing and none at all isn't always obvious until you're already on it. I've talked about this kind of setup before, how a place can feel controlled right up until it isn't. Dorothy Hale was 41, a school administrator from the Netherlands traveling alone through the United States. She had experience hiking, mostly on marked trails, and she planned her trips carefully. People who knew her described someone independent and organized, the kind of person who followed through on what she set out to do. She had been in the area for a couple of days, staying near one of the more popular trail systems. The lower sections were straightforward, clear paths, stable footing, designated stops. That's where most visitors stayed. A small production crew from a regional outdoor travel series had been filming at the falls that morning. Lower sections, designated paths, the kind of footage that fills segment B rolls. They had been there since early morning and were wrapping up near the viewing area when Dorothy passed them on her way up. Above that point, the trail ended. A posted warning marked the transition. It was placed directly along the path, stating that the area beyond was unsafe due to slippery rock and steep terrain near the upper falls. She went past it anyway. That decision stands out because nothing about the conditions changed suddenly. The rock ahead was already wet. The sound of the water was constant. The surface looked exactly like what the sign was describing. She moved upward across the exposed rock. The incline wasn't extreme, but it required steady footing. The surface was coated with a thin layer of water and algae, not always obvious at a glance, but consistently there. From a distance, it looks solid. Up close, it doesn't hold the way you expect it to. Two hikers were positioned higher along the slope, making their way down. They saw her moving upward, steady at first, stepping carefully across the rock. She didn't stop, which makes me think the first few steps felt manageable, just enough to make continuing seem reasonable. Then it shifted. Her foot slipped on a section where water had pooled across the rock. There wasn't anything to grab onto. No railing, no stable edge within reach. And that's the part that turns it from a mistake into something you can't stop. She went down fast. At first it was a slide. Her body moved across the rock surface, gaining speed as the slope carried her downward. The hikers above reacted immediately, but they were too far to reach her. She went over the edge. The drop below the upper section was approximately 50 feet, down into a rocky runoff area at the base of the falls. She struck the rock during the fall before coming to rest partially in shallow water below. The hikers made their way down as quickly as they could, alerting others near the lower viewing area. People nearby moved toward the location, but access to where she had fallen required going around through a lower approach. Dorothy Hale was unresponsive when responders reached her. She was pronounced dead later that afternoon. The injuries were consistent with a fall from height onto rock. The production crew's camera had been rolling when it happened, not directed at her, but close enough that the audio captured the moment and the edge of the frame caught the fall. The footage was handed over to authorities and never released due to legal concerns following the incident.